Sadhu Sundar Singh, Called of God. Chapter 7, Called to Suffer. Number 1. Quote, "A man's foes shall be they of his own household," unquote. Matthew 10:36. Quote, "For unto you it is given in the behalf of Christ, not only to believe on him, but also to suffer for his sake," unquote. Philippians 1:29. For 9 months from that night onward, Sundar Singh was to pass from sorrow to sorrow until he had drunk the cup of suffering to its bitterest dregs. For all that time he remained in his father's house. When it became known that he had chosen Jesus as his master, it seemed too hideous a thing for any member of his family to believe. That one of their number, belonging as they did to a proud and influential family, should dream of joining the despised sect of the Christians, none could contemplate. The father, with much earnest pleading and tenderness, urged his son to put aside such degrading and foolish thoughts, to remember the high estate he had been born to, and the noble prospects that lay before him. He unrolled before the eyes of Sundar's vision of wealth and honor, of high positions awaiting him, but seeing these things made no impression. He portrayed to him the shame and disgrace that would befall his family if he persisted in his present course. The father knew his son's heart, and the love of that heart still held for his mother and kindred. None but Sundar can tell the temptations of that dreadful hour. Anguish filled his soul that he should bring reproach on those he loved. At that moment, too, were spread before him the temptations, ambitions, and glitter of the world, and once more he was to feel the power of earth's attractions and earth's love. But God had not called Sundar from despair and darkness to let him fall a prey to these temptations. It seemed to him that Jesus whispered, "He that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he that taketh not up his cross and followeth me is not worthy of me." Only when he saw his father's tears did poor Sundar's heart almost break, but even as he declared his love for his father, he had strength given to speak of a greater love for one who had called him to follow him and whom he could not disobey. Such scenes of pathos are not to be dwelt upon in the pages of a book. About this time, when it was fully realized that Sundar had made up his mind to follow Christ, a fresh attempt was made to turn him aside and to win him back to his old faith. An honored uncle, the possessor of great wealth, one day took him off to his large house and led him to a deep cellar below the main building. Taking him inside, the uncle locked the door, and Sundar wondered whether his last hour had come. But taking a key, his uncle stepped forward and unlocked a large safe. Throwing open the door, there was revealed to the boy's eyes such wealth as he had never dreamt of. Rolls of banknotes, priceless jewels, and quantities of money were what he saw. His uncle then besought him not to disgrace the family name by becoming a Christian. In taking his Puggaree from his own head, he laid it on Sundar's feet as the last and humblest supplication he could make, with the words, "All these shall be yours if you will remain with us." Sundar felt this temptation keenly, for not only did the sight of such riches dazzle his eyes, but his heart was deeply moved by his uncle's condescension in thus humbling and humiliating himself to the youngest son of the household. Sundar's eyes filled with tears as he beheld the Puggaree lying on his feet, marking the disgrace which he must bring on those he loved, and his uncle standing bareheaded before him. But at that moment his heart became filled to overflowing with such love and devotion to Christ that refusal came easily to his lips, and with it came such a sense of divine approbation and acceptance of his dearest Savior as strengthened every holy resolution to be faithful to his Lord. After that his father made it plain to him that he was no longer a son of the house, but an outcast. Both Sundar and the Singh classmate had read the New Testament with the same result, that they found Christ, but they were not of an age to take the great step of confessing Christ publicly, and were so obliged to remain in their Hindu homes. The relatives of Sundar's friend brought a case into the law courts charging the American missionaries with compelling the boy to become a Christian. Upon appearing before the magistrate, the boy bore steady witness to the faith that was in him, and being questioned, he took a New Testament from his pocket, and holding it in his hands, replied, "Not because of the Padre, Sahib, but by reading this, Injil, I believe on Christ, and so let the Padre, S-A-H-I-B, go. Thus the case fell through, and for some time longer, Sundar and his friend were forced to remain with their relatives until they were able to take the monumentous step that was to mean so much to them both later on. It is easy to see how, when all persecution and the temptations of a great career failed to turn aside the boy from his set purpose, the bitterest hostility was aroused among his people. His own brother proved his fiercest enemy, and day by day Sundar suffered bitter persecution at his hand. No language was too foul to be used against him and his, quote, Jesus, unquote, and with redoubled care he had to steal away where no eye could see him if he was to refresh his soul by reading of his precious New Testament. He was taken away from the mission school, which was evidently broken up and had to be closed because of the persecution. Nor was this all, for the open hostility of the villagers became so great that the small Christian community, no longer able to procure food at the shops, was obliged to withdraw to more friendly quarters, leaving Sundar alone and friendless. As the storm increased in fury, Sundar saw that it was impossible for him to remain in his father's house, and so evidently he made his way to the headquarters of the American Presbyterian Mission in Ludhiana, where the missionaries received him kindly and took care of him. Special arrangements were made for the cooking of his food to prevent trouble with his family, and Sundar entered the high school to continue his education. The sensitive boy had high ideals as to what Christians ought to be, and before long he discovered that his schoolmates were for the most part only nominal Christians, and the conduct of some of them caused him to leave the mission and retrace his steps homewards. Arrived at Rampur, his parents naturally thought he had given up Christianity and received him with great kindness, but they were speedily disillusioned, for they soon found him to be a more determined follower of Jesus than before. Sundar now took the final step that was to place him hopelessly outside the pale of his religion, community, and family by cutting short his long beard, the sign to all that he was no longer a Sheen. Sheens were instructed in their sacred book, the Granth, Granth, never to cut the hair, and every true Sheen glories in his hair. Among various races of India, the long tuft of hair is regarded with special reverency, and is the last sign of Hinduism. A caste man lays aside when he becomes a Christian. So Sundar, in cutting his hair, brought ostracism on himself, and at the same time it was an unmistakable declaration for Christ and for his cross. Then fell on this poor boy the bitterest blow of all. He was to be disowned, cast out, treated only as the lowest of the low, and that by those who loved him best. The Apostle Paul wrote, "We were made as the offscouring of all things." And this was the treatment meted out to a boy of 16, who up to this point had not entirely cast in his lot with Christians. He was no longer counted as one of the family. His food was served to him outside the house, just as if he belonged to the untouchables, and he was made to sleep in the same place. The first time this was done, the poor boy's eyes filled with tears, and the weight of his cross seemed more than he could bear. Shortly after this, one of Sundar's brother-in-laws, who was in the service of the Raja of Napa, took him for a day or two to stay in his own home, in the hope of bringing him to a different state of mind. It was then that the Raja heard of the matter, and he summoned Sundar to appear before the bar of the State Assembly, Dubar, to account for his conduct. The Raja used much persuasive language and made glowing offers to him. Moreover, he made a stern appeal to his pride of race, reminding him that he was a Singh, lion, and that to be a Christian was to become a dog. Whatever answer Sundar made, it must have been given to him in that very hour that he should speak, for neither argument nor appeal, nor yet offers of high position, were able to move him in his resolution to follow Christ at all costs. He then returned home, and immediately all the pent-up anger of his father was let loose upon him. The hopeless boy was cursed, disowned, and told that on the following morning he must go forth from his ancestral home. With a sorely wounded heart, that night he laid down for the last time on his father's veranda to sleep. Before sunrise the following day he was cast forth with nothing but the thin clothes he wore and enough money to take him to Patiala by rail. Homeless, friendless, and utterly destitute, Sundar turned his back on the home of his childhood. Jesus, I my cross have taken, all to leave and follow thee. destitute, despised, forsaken. Thou from hence my all shall be. End of chapter 7, having been read by Peter John Paresis.